So in case you've been a bit behind on modern animation because you aren't trying to make a career out of absorbing every inch of pop culture that you can and actually have a life and so forth, then you might not have known that a classic cartoon show from your childhood was recently reimagined for a modern audience. And if you can't tell what show I'm talking about by reading the title, I don't really know what to tell you. So yeah, let's talk about Ducktales. 2017's Ducktales is a reboot of the classic 90s Ducktales cartoon that aired on the Disney Channel. If you're having a hard time remembering which show that was, here's the theme song. Yeah, that one. Anyway, the current iteration basically follows the same formula as the original. Three Duck brothers, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, all go live with the rich Uncle Scrooge along with their other uncle, Donald. They go on various adventures ranging from the fantastical treasure hunts to mundane business ventures. They're more interesting than I'm making them sound. But the original DuckTales isn't the only show that reboot draws influence from. It also takes a lot from another popular Duck-themed show that you may or may not remember was a thing back in the 90s. Yep, Darkwing Duck, a Batman-style Duck-themed superhero that aired from 1991 to 1992. And as I'm sure you can guess, I was a huge fan of that when I was a kid. Although, if I'm being honest, I don't remember much from the actual show. Anyway, in the 2017 DuckTales, Darkwing Duck is reimagined as an old popular TV show adored by Scrooge's pilot, Lunchpad McQuack, that was canceled before it could properly finish. And that brings us to the episode I want to talk about today, The Duck Knight Returns, which is the 16th episode of the show's second season. The episode opens up with the original actor of Darkwing Duck, Jim Starlin, at the opening to a furniture store where Launchpad and Dewey are attending. Interestingly, Jim Starlin is once again voiced by original Darkwing Duck actor Jim Cummings. You get it because they're based on the actual actor. Moving on. Despite its modest cult following, Starlin has evidently fallen out of the public eye and seems desperate to find his own way back into stardom. As a result, he seems pretty bitter and resentful to be in his current lot in life, a mood that is not helped by the fact that one of his biggest fans, Launchpad, can't even approach him without fainting. Although the tide seems to have turned as Dewey discovers that Darkwing Duck has begun trending on social media due to the announcement of a reboot movie based on a cult character. Starlin interprets this as an opportunity for a big comeback and enlists the help of Launchpad and Dewey. They give Starlin a ride to the movie studio, only to find that the studio is owned by their very own Scrooge McDuck. From there, the group barge into a boardroom where Scrooge is talking with the film's director, Alistair Boonswan, who's British, which means he's classy, and he's got artistic visions of a dark, edgy reboot of the classic kids cartoon that's all about darkness and grappling with his own soul and... Oh man, it's Christopher Nolan. They don't even try to hide it, it's Christopher Nolan. This is honestly where things get pretty scathing. So naturally, both Starlin and Launchpad go into the meeting guns blazing, with Starlin acting excited about the prospect of working together and Launchpad asking all kinds of fanboy nitpicky questions about whether or not all the stuff he loved will be in the movie.
Ah, cool! A big budget reboot of a thing I loved as a kid! Those are always great! Is Darkwing's motorcycle in it? Is he still a noble hero who gets back up and fights for right no matter what evil throws at him? You're keeping the theme song, right?
To attempt to appease these eager new voices, Alistair offers to show them the trailer, and... If there's any ambiguity on the show's thoughts on the recent Batman movies, this is pretty much tears them all to shreds. See, darkness, more darkness, pearls falling slowly to the ground, people running away from Darkwing, pearls still falling, it's hilarious, but man, it does not pull any punches. Oh, and the kicker?
This film not suitable for children.
In case it wasn't abundantly clear who they're making fun of here, they even show the traditional scrawny villain Megavolt all beefed out and wearing the Bane jacket at one point. I guess you can make the argument that it's not just ripping on the Nolan movies so much as the overly serious and unnecessarily dark tones that those films and future films would adopt, but we'll get to that later. Naturally, Launchpad does not like what he sees, proclaiming that it's not at all true to the character, but Alistair seems to have his own mind made up about his edgy psychological interpretation. Starlin receives his own rude awakening when he's told by Alistair that he will, in fact, not be playing the title character, and instead will be played by a significantly younger actor who actually introduced himself to Starlin at his signing as the president of his fan club. Starlin takes the news about as well as you'd expect, and he decides to recruit Launchpad on a quest to get himself into the movie. Starlin attempts to break into the set wearing his classic suit to try to worm his way into the film, sending Launchpad to the trailer of the new actor playing Darkwing to lock him in so he can't show up on set. But when Launchpad goes to do exactly that, he finds that, much to his surprise, this new actor isn't just some actor looking to overshadow the original, he's a fan. In fact, he might be more of a fan than Launchpad is. and they spend some time bonding over their shared love of the character. He then goes on to explain exactly why this character means so much to him, and why it's so important that he does the role justice. When he was a kid, he used to get beat up a lot at school, and then he saw this show about a hero who always got back up whenever things got hard, or no matter how hard he got hit. He took this as inspiration and started dressing up like him to school, along with taking a Darkwing Duck lunchbox. And while this admittedly caused him to get beat up more, he always got back up. Getting back up became his mantra, a mantra he carried to this day. And while he knows the film they're making isn't as good as the director seems to think it is, he wants to be that inspiration for a kid just like him. This convinces Launchpad to work with the actor to try to save the movie. The actor also tries to bring Starling on board, but yeah, he's not having it and knocks him out cold. On the actual set, Starling follows through on his plan by going off script during the finale to make it just like the old show, but in doing so, accidentally sets the stage on fire. The director and crew try to stop him, but he's clearly gone insane and tries to kill anyone who tries to stop the camera from filming, using what looks to be a lightning turret? Well, props for practical effects. But Starling's attention is drawn by the return of the actor dressed in his costume and calling himself the real Darkwing Duck. What follows is a final confrontation between the old Darkwing and the new, as Starling throws everything he's got at Darkwing only for him to keep pushing forward, repeating the mantra, "Get back up." The episode ultimately ends with the film getting scrapped and Starling presumed dead. The name of the actor is revealed to be Drake Mallard, the alter ego of Darkwing from the original series, who decides to become a superhero for real, taking the mantra from his own childhood hero. Young upstart taking over a mantle from a popular superhero? Original hero is washed up, bitter, and desperate? Continuous threat of getting back up whenever you get knocked down? Where have I seen the same thing recently? Ah, there it is. Into the Spider-Verse. So yeah, if you're a nerd and watching this channel, there's a good chance you've seen this movie already, so I'm only going to go over the plot as much as I need to so I can properly illustrate my point. And if for some reason you haven't seen it, check it out. It's arguably the best Spider-Man film of all time. The movie starts out with an introduction to Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man. He briefly goes over his adventures and his role in the city before proclaiming himself to be the one and only Spider-Man. Except he isn't. Not for long, anyway. Enter Miles Morales, a young African Latino teenager from Harlem who has just begun to attend a prestigious private school that he really doesn't want to go to. His interests lie more in the artistic side of things, specifically graffiti art. His dad being a cop, though, means he can't really express that interest very openly. His uncle Aaron, on the other hand, is much more open to his artistic expressions and takes him to a hidden chamber deep in the subway system to let him tag the wall there freely. While he's there, though, Miles is greeted by an unexpected guest, a genetically modified spider that proceeds to sneak up on him and bite his hand. This leads to his body rapidly changing to something more Spider-Man-y, which results in Miles returning to the chamber to investigate the spider. As he's doing so, he accidentally runs into Spider-Man fighting off the Green Goblin and the Prowler, as the Kingpin starts up what he calls a Super Collider, which can open up alternate dimensions. The Kingpin hopes to use this machine to bring back his wife and son, who he tragically lost. But doing so will cause a black hole to open up over Harlem. Spider-Man manages to stop Kingpin from fully activating the Collider, but is killed by Kingpin in the process. Before his death, however, Spider-Man makes Miles promise to eventually return and destroy the Collider once and for all to save the city. While the city grieves the loss of Spider-Man, Miles desperately tries to figure out his new powers so he can stop the Kingpin, but it's pretty clear he's out of his depths. Much to his surprise, though, he runs into Peter Parker, but not his Peter Parker. This is Peter Parker from another dimension, Dimension 616 to be exact. This Peter isn't much like the Peter Miles knew, though. He's bitter, cynical, overweight, his personal life is in shambles, and has seemed to have given up on everything that makes Spider-Man, well, Spider-Man. Miles initially thinks that this new Peter can help teach him how to become his own Spider-Man, but he clearly shows no interest in doing so. In fact, he has to be guilted into helping out at all. Although, as they continue to work together to stop the Kingpin, Peter finds that he actually quite likes being a mentor, and he starts to see something in Miles that's been missing from his own life for a long time. They both soon find out, though, that they're not the only friendly spider people in the neighborhood, as they are soon joined by 3 other alternate universe versions of the Wallcrawler. Noir Spider-Man, played by our most holy of holies, Nicolas Cage, Penny Parker, the answer to the question what if Spider-Man was a mecha and a Japanese schoolgirl, Spider-Gwen, where Gwen Stacy got bitten by the spider instead of Peter, and Spider-Ham, which just speaks for itself.
I just washed my hands. That's why they're wet. No other reason.
Of the pack, however, Miles still sticks out like a sore thumb to the rest because, as they're quick to point out, he's the most inexperienced and the only one not in tune with his powers. As a result, each version of Spidey tries to quickly teach him their specific style of being Spider-Man or woman, with only one lesson in common. No matter how often you get knocked down, always get back up. It seems Miles isn't ready for the big leagues and he runs back to his uncle's apartment to hide out. But his shame quickly turns into dismay when he finds out that his Uncle Aaron is actually the villainous Prowler working for the Kingpin. This eventually leads to a scuffle at Aunt May's house, where the Prowler eventually corners Miles and discovers his secret identity. This results in the Prowler backing off only to be shot and killed by the Kingpin. The other Spider people try to comfort a grieving Miles by sharing their own experiences of loss, while also emphasizing that the hardest part about being Spider-Man is that you can't save everyone. However, despite all of this, Peter tells Miles that he's still not ready to help them and he must be left behind. When an angry Miles asks when he'll know he's ready, Peter replies, "It's a leap of faith." This, along with a subsequent speech from his father, finally gives Miles the courage to stop trying to be like all the other Spider people and be his own Spider-Man. This allows him to finally take command of his powers, design his own suit, and ultimately save not only the other spiders, but also the world. With all the other Spider peeps back in their respective dimensions, Miles becomes the new and only Spider-Man, as he ends on narration explaining that when all is said and done, anyone can wear the mask, anyone can be Spider-Man, because anyone can get back up. Okay, so now you're more than likely wondering why the hell I'm trying to tie together Ducktales and Into the Spider-Verse, because as of right now, the only thing you might think they have in common is an adopting identity plotline and get back up. But I think there's an unspoken subtext that both properties share. A pretty condemning argument against toxic fan bases. See, within every pop culture fan base, there lies a subculture that takes things a bit to the extreme. These are often the assholes you hear about that threaten and harass creators who don't make things exactly the way they want it to be made. And I'm not necessarily talking about the crazy anti-SJW people, that's a whole other video. Anyway, this particular group of fans have an extremely specific view on how all their beloved characters can and should be portrayed, and will often directly attack or talk down to anyone that disagrees with them, as if they're just idiots who would see things their way if they were just smarter. Or just shout into the void if X character or story didn't meet Y requirements, that conveniently caters directly to their particular version of things. You tend to see this the most in Marvel fans, DC fans, Star Wars fans, basically any property that's been going on for years and years and years. And oddly enough, you see a lot of this among the Spider-Man fans. Now, to be clear, that's not to say all fans of any of these properties are on the same level as these obnoxious individuals, but there's a strong and vocal minority in each one who continuously pick fights about the dumbest nitpicks and push their opinions as fact until your face melts off. Thankfully, the worst of these dumbass arguments can be found on places like Twitter or Reddit, so if you're not on either one, consider yourself lucky, but if you are, follow me. While the criticisms laid by these people can range from the broad strokes to the weirdly detailed, you can often lump the most egregious of these into two categories, or at least the two categories I'm going to discuss. The people who either want it exactly like the source material that matches what they have in their heads, and the people who think that everything must be ultra serious and adult, and anything that's funny or family friendly, God forbid, is bad. Surprisingly, Ducktales is the one that most overtly has something to say about these toxic fans, while also laying into the recent movie trends that inadvertently led to its dominance in the pop culture discourse. Primarily through its overt critique on the Nolan Batman trilogy, or at least what the Nolan trilogy ultimately inspired. See, it might be hard for people to remember now, but Batman Begins was a big game changer for comic book films back when it came out in 2005. It was the first comic movie most of us saw that took itself extremely seriously, especially after the last Batman movie was that one. And people fell in love with the dark, gritty take on the Caped Crusader, but Ducktales paints this interpretation in the negative. Because while it was definitely revolutionary for its time, it also positions the Nolan films were less about doing the character of Batman justice, and more about the director wanting to put their own spin on the character. In doing so, it would ultimately lead the character into losing all of his original intention and purpose, and most importantly, forget one of the character's primary audiences: children. Now, I don't personally believe that the Nolan films lost the point of Batman necessarily. I actually think they found a pretty good balance between the important emotional elements that resonate with fans while also doing a different interpretation. That being said, it's hard to deny the films that would follow in its footsteps would suffer from the very problems Ducktales is critiquing. The Snyder films in particular attempted to make their characters darker, brooding, and deliberately not for kids in an attempt to recapture the Nolan formula. And yes, I'm sorry guys, but I gotta pick on these movies again because they have their own weird toxic fan culture and they are just so damn representative of exactly what I'm talking about. I promise I'll keep it brief. Because Batman vs. Superman in particular was less about Batman or Superman and more about a director projecting his own ideas of the world and people through a very cynical lens that assumes that darker means deeper and therefore better. But the film is so preoccupied with its views on hypermasculinity, Ayn Rand-lean philosophies. Fun fact, Snyder is a fan of Ayn Rand, look it up. And the idea of deconstruction that it completely fails to understand what makes these characters the icons they are and why they mean so much to kids and adults. I mean, the fact there's an R-rated version of any film with Superman demonstrates how there is clear lack of interest in actually understanding the character. But because people tend to associate dark with more complex and brooding with deep, largely because of the Nolan films, you'll see a wide range of defenses for these darker interpretations, acting as if people who didn't like it just didn't get it, you know, because it's so deep, you guys. But I'm getting pissy. I told myself I wasn't gonna get pissy. The point is that these characters are meant to be inspirations for the next generation on how to be brave, how to be strong, how to conquer fear, how to inspire hope. Those are all elements that kids aspire to be because of these characters. And to abandon all of that for a cynical, joyless Superman who broods and a Batman who kills with impunity just feels reckless. Like, for all the deep, dark elements that can be contrived from making them go against type, it does so by sacrificing the characters' very souls. Because, like it or not, these characters are meant to be enjoyed by children and adults alike. And to make it dark for seemingly the sake of it not only just betrays the intent and purpose of the characters on screen, but also permanently alters the way that children are supposed to see their favorite heroes. On the other hand, there is the danger of being too much of a slave to the source material that you can fail to fulfill the same purpose the character is supposed to convey. In Ducktales, that is represented by Starling's desire to put himself back in the film, as well as Launchpad's initial desire to help him. See, Starling's motivation might be ultimately selfish in nature, but it's also symbolic of many fans' desire to keep their adaptation an exact copy of the version they remember the most, because that's what they think works the best or most appeals to their sense of nostalgia. Because surely if you keep every little detail exactly as it was from the source you love, that'll make it perfect, right? But as we established in a previous editorial, that's not always the way to go either. Because if you spend your entire film focusing on fan service and obsessing over every detail, you can also lose the soul of whatever you are adapting. And that's exactly what happens to Starling. He becomes so obsessed with putting himself in the Darkwing Duck movie and making exactly how he would have done it, that he ends up turning into the villain, a walking embodiment of fans' toxic obsession. Which brings us to Launchpad and Mallard, the two actual fans. Launchpad is presented from the beginning as what you might initially assume is the obsessive fanboy, but in reality is an implant for the audience to discover what is actually important about these adaptations. Launchpad starts out on Starling's side, thinking he wants the Darkwing Duck movie to be exactly what he remembers from his childhood, but it isn't until he meets and talks with Mallard that he comes to a realization. The details of the character, the origins, the story, the aesthetics, none of that actually matters. What actually matters is what the character made you feel. And that brings us to Into the Spider-Verse, which has a lingering message throughout the film of anyone can wear the mask. And while many audience members have taken this to mean that they themselves can be the hero if they so choose to be, there is a subtext of the story that often goes overlooked. Now, is it possible I'm way overthinking this and this is in no way, shape, or form the intent? Probably, but just because it might not have been the intention does not mean the interpretation is without merit. Plus, it's my show and I can talk about whatever I want, so here we go. As I've mentioned before, toxic Spider-Man fans tend to be a bit on the picky side, favoring their version of the character and shouting down anyone that disagrees with them. They will often nitpick every little thing about a version of the character they don't like to prove how the creators didn't get Spider-Man, or betrays the character, or something or another. And while that might be the case for some adaptations, see my aforementioned examples, there is yet to be an adaptation of Spider-Man that has actually done this. Moreover, Into the Spider-Verse is actually very keenly aware of this, and a big part of the narrative is spent pointing out to longtime Spider-Man fans that they're missing the point. And what better way to demonstrate that by bringing over multiple versions of Spider-Man? The movie starts out with the most traditional version of Spider-Man we know, with the snappy quips, helpful demeanor, fighting the bad guys, saving the world, you know the drill. But this Spider-Man isn't actually our main character. That honor goes to a completely different version known at the time only by hardcore comic fans, Miles Morales. Then, when the most traditional Spider-Man dies in the first act, he's replaced by another Peter Parker who is about as far from the ideal version you can get. He's lazy, jaded, overweight, and has let the cruelty of life completely defeat and cripple him. In other words, everything fans would hate Spider-Man to be. And to add insult to injury, according to the film itself, this version comes from the 616 universe, which is also the main Marvel universe. So not only is this Spider-Man everything fans hate, but he's also the main one. On top of that, we're also giving 4 other versions of Spider-Man. All are extremely different from each other, except for one key element. They all believe that when life gets hard and you get knocked down, you always get back up. The interesting thing is, while they all explicitly say this to Miles, they all still try to teach Miles how they'd specifically be Spider-Man, rather than let Miles discover how he'd do it. It isn't until he finally stops trying to be like all the other Spider people and starts being his own that he's able to become the one and only Spider-Man. And that's where the point lies. There is no one version of Spider-Man. There's no specific blueprint to what makes Spider-Man who he or she is. Because the details of the origin, the Uncle Bens, the Mary Janes, what have you, none of it actually matters. What matters is the soul, what drives Spider-Man to be who he is. And who he is the one who always gets back up, who feels so obligated to do the right thing that he'll sacrifice his own needs consistently to do it. Because doing what's right and never giving up in the process is the most important part of Spider-Man, and it's the part that speaks the most to people. All the plot details, the origin story, the supporting characters, that's all window dressing. Changing that up doesn't actually portray the character in any meaningful way. As long as Spider-Man does what's right while still trying to live a normal life, that's an accurate depiction. And believe it or not, every adaptation of Spider-Man has done this. Maguire did it, Garfield did it, Holland did it. They've all done it, so they're all Spider-Man. Even Jake Johnson, who voiced Spidey in Into the Spider-Verse, eventually rediscovers the soul of Spider-Man for himself by movie's end. Now, that's not to say you're obligated to like every version. You're allowed to have your favorites and not like who you don't like. But to say that a version is wrong just because it's not how you personally see it or want it is the wrong mindset to have, and it's not what Spider-Man is about. Just for further proof, let's look at the movie's villains. Of the many villains in Into the Spider-Verse, the only ones who are closest to the comic book counterparts are the Kingpin and Tombstone. Everyone else has a radically different design from their comic book origins, and I think there's a very deliberate reason why that is. Kingpin's whole motivation revolves around maintaining the status quo, and Tombstone is his right-hand guy, and thus the most dedicated to his goals. See, Kingpin wants to bend reality itself to regain what he's lost. He fears change and wants to return things exactly as he remembers them. He ignores the fact that whatever alternate version he summoned wouldn't actually be his real family. He just wants everything to be exactly the way it used to be. But as everyone continuously points out to him, that doesn't work. And in doing so, says directly to the audience that change must be allowed to happen. You can't always keep things exactly the way they used to be. Things sometimes need to change, which is why it's fitting that the man who wants to maintain the status quo isn't defeated by the ideal version of Spider-Man, but the one who just finished creating his own version of him. It's a direct rejection of fanboy obsession, with needing everything to be like the source material or to fit an exact mold. Miles doesn't need to be like Peter Parker. He just needs to understand what Spider-Man represents, and he can change the rest however he wants. Just like how Mallard becomes Darkwing Duck not by trying to be like Starling, but by embodying the parts he idolized about the character as a kid. Both Miles and Mallard understand that the details of the character's story doesn't matter. It only matters what speaks to the core of their fans. And if they can embody that right, not only can they become their own heroes, but also inspire the next generation of heroes. Because these heroes don't need to be dark, edgy, and psychologically tortured to say something of value, which I feel is something about all these superheroes that people lose sight of. If it's something as big as Spider-Man or as goofy as Darkwing Duck, these characters that people remember are remembered for a reason. And the reason is often that it spoke to them in some unique way. It can inspire, it can guide, it can mean more than they're even fully capable of understanding yet. But it says something that helps shape and define who they are. It can shape you as an adult, but even more so when you're a child. But because they help shape us as fans, there's the unfortunate tendency among others to become either overprotective or entitled to the version that helps shape them, which can lead to bullying, harassment, and gatekeeping. But as both Spider-Man and Darkwing Duck point out, anyone that indulges in that ugliness is completely missing the point. If you really are a true fan, then you want to embody what makes your favorite character great. You want to share them with the next generation so they can learn what makes them great. These characters are meant to be shared, not hoarded. They're not meant to be twisted beyond recognition for pretentious creators, nor are they meant to be slaves to a very specific mold. They're meant to change. They're meant to adapt. They do so they can reach out to more people and spread the one message they embody that will never change. Don't give up. Don't let the world make you cold. Don't let it twist you into something you're not. And when the world, or even just one person, eventually knocks you down, always remember,
Get back up.
So no matter how many hits I take,
No matter how many times you get hit, can you get back up?
When you think you can't, keep going.
Come on, Miles. You can do it.
Get up, Miles.
Come on, Miles, get up.
Get up, Spider-Man.
get back up.